Welcome back to the Ruperto Carola lecture series on Freiheit, die Universität als Diskursraum, freedom and the university as a space for discourse. Some 75 years ago, in 1949, after quite a few years of unfreedom, a new German constitution re-guaranteed not just, but also academic freedom. And this anniversary is the background for the Wissenschaftsjahr Freiheit, under the auspices of which this year's Ruperto Carola lecture series offers different perspectives on the role of freedom in the academe and beyond. We began 2 weeks ago with Gisèle Sapiro, who, in conversation with Manfred Berg, introduced us to the many threats to academic freedom in the world, with examples from what she called illiberal and autocratic states, but also from, as of today, still to be considered democratic polities such as the United States. Let's see tomorrow. Last week, our colleague in law, Eckhard Reimer, illustrated the special position that Germany holds in this regard. Next to South Africa and the Philippines, Germany is one of the few countries in the world that includes academic freedom as a separate freedom in its constitution, thus guaranteeing in Artikel 5.3 Kunst und Wissenschaft, Forschung und Lehre sind frei. In his lecture, Eckhard Reimer illustrated that this academic freedom, as guaranteed by the German constitution, is a special type of freedom, however, one that allows for free and open debate. Yes, the university is and should remain a space of discourse, but under special conditions. On the one hand, one that allows the possibility to think, to hear, to discuss all, but always under special conditions, including scientific rationality and criticality. And it is these that academic freedom upholds. Academic freedom is not the same as freedom of expression, explained Eckhard Reimer. The task of the researcher is to always situate different opinions within their socio-historical trajectory. Research requires objectivity, verifiability, methodological rigor. The university is not a marketplace of opinions. It is not a gallery where these are exhibited. It does not give in to complexity reduction. Instead, it is a laboratory that allows for scientific scrutiny and refinement, for deep digging and broad considerations, contextualizing, testing, weighing, verifying, and falsifying arguments, for rethinking, and all that always under transparently communicated conditions. And that is why Eckhard Reimer ended with Walter Steinmeiers Diktum: Wenn ich einen Strich drunter mache, dann gilt in meinen Augen Folgendes: Wir haben kein Problem mit der Meinungsfreiheit, wir haben ein Problem mit unserer Streitkultur. Wir müssen sie aufs Neue lernen. Und weil die Universität seit Jahrhunderten der Ort ist, an dem eine Gesellschaft das Streiten lernt, so darf gerade die Universität gerade heute ihre Streitkultur auf keinen Fall verlernen. But Eckhard Reimer also argued for that very specific and rationally informed debating culture that academic freedom allows for and that universities must therefore practice. Das war his Plädoyer für Wissenschaft auf der Mondrückseite, not in public. So if we agree that research thrives and builds on multi-perspectival contradiction and debate, a critical spirit, it is clear that universities must play a crucial role in providing a forum precisely for this critical dialogue, in providing the open discursive space, semper apertus, that is the prerequisite for combating ignorance. Academic freedom means that we insist on the right to know, that is, to know everything, to think beyond and out of the box, and this is crucial for society as a whole. Academic freedom in this sense means that we cannot simplify and speak in black and white only. Scientific scrutiny shows us many colors. So is freedom of expression in danger? And especially in our universities? That was the title of an article that Eckhard Reimer wrote for the FAZ in July. The answer, his answer last week, was a clear no. But freedom of expression is, and this is important, not the same as academic freedom. If we want to live academic freedom, then we need to question the ways in which we're going to react when certain methodological approaches are dismissed as ideological. Gender studies, for example. And on the other hand, when these same methodological approaches significantly restrict our use of specific terminologies, the N-word. Semper apertus also means that we have to question whether any type of language policing measures can be accepted. How can universities avoid themselves to begin practicing a kind of discriminatory, elitist illiberality under the umbrella of academic freedom? What do the accusations against cancel culture and wokeism tell us about our own academic practice? In the spirit of academic freedom, we must make sure that not every paradigm shift, a la Thomas Kuhn and Michel Foucault, ensues a change of the one and only truth structure and thus potentially muzzles certain speakers. Indeed, there must always be doubt in view of one truth that may well be, certainly is, ideological. The formulation Eckhard Reimer offered is extremely important here. An institution that guarantees its members academic freedom thereby acquires it itself, and vice versa. If the institution muzzles its members, it also loses academic freedom itself. So, to what extent can, should, may our universities, which are said to be open to the world and host academics from all over the world, reject the presence of certain academics from certain other academic cultures and their correspondingly orientated academic work, China and Russia being examples? How can universities which thrive on a lively critical spirit see the inscriptions on the Neue Uni, dem lebendigen Geist, universities who are semper apertus, the inscriptions that you can see downstairs in the Alte Uni, how can they be places where multi-perspectivity and a pronounced culture of debate are practiced, where the activist and the reactionary are heard, but where at the same time every statement, no matter how propagandistic or unacceptable we may find it, is analyzed and contextualized, historicized? Can such universities and their critical analytical spirit survive and be preserved against the backdrop of multiple crises and conflicts and increasing moral pressure? Can we make sure that controversial issues continue to be presented controversially in the sense of the Beutelsbacher consensus, so that the student body is not overwhelmed by the one hierarchically superior and therefore powerful, potentially authoritarian, highly qualified teaching opinion? And can we make sure that the two worlds of personal political opinion on the one hand and our academic disciplinary and methodological commitment on the other remain clearly separated? It is difficult when these two worlds intermingle in certain areas, queer studies, peace studies, post or decolonial studies, especially against the background of demands for engaged humanities and social sciences on the one hand, and even more so in the practical and applied branches of sciences on the other hand, in political science, in economics, in law, not to mention medicine. At what point does the scientist, the academic, only have an impact on society, and at what point is the scientist himself already an activist for a cause? Now, in the provocative proposal for your lecture today, Xiang Biao, you mention that Chinese saying that those who eat from the rice pot of the state fund should not break it. Now, this, of course, can be and is being used as such in China to justify that scholars who receive public funding should not criticize the state. Can the rice pot analogy also find resonance in Germany, you ask? Why should taxpayers fund projects that upset German feelings? Indeed, the question of how academic freedom relates to public responsibility, as here as well as in other parts of the world, a question that you will address in your dialogue today, is at the heart of our debate. And I'm looking forward to your thoughts on how the question of how freedom and responsibility can be reconciled, so long as they are distributed in differentiated ways across different scales, how that question will be resolved. Should university be a space for free debate or a space that protects the public will, you ask? We'll see. We'll also see whether you're right in saying that the divide between state and society is as profound in the West as it is in China. We'll see. I'm looking forward to your thoughts on how we can and should perhaps consciously step outside the rigid structures that are silencing us, instead of trying to solve problems within existing systems. But before, a few words about who you are. Who is Xiang Biao? Born in 1972, he is co-director of the Max-Planck-Institut for Social Anthropology in Halle in Germany. Educated at Peking University, Beida, and Oxford University, so the two best places to be educated in, he began his scholarly career as a sociologist studying migrant workers in 1990s Beijing, and in 2000 published a widely read book on Zhejiang village, the name of the community where migrant workers lived. After moving from China to Oxford, Xiang broadened his focus to high-tech Indian migrant labor in Australia, and then to the subject of unskilled labor migration from China to Japan, South Korea, and Singapore. He has deliberately widened his research field in this manner to avoid being labeled a China anthropologist, because he wanted to ask questions that extend beyond the field of China anthropology. And so he won in 2008 the Anthony Leeds Prize for a book on India, Global Body Shopping, scrutinizing the Indian labor system in the information technology industry. And he worked on the emergent transnational retirement industry in Southeast Asia, and in 2012 won another prize for an article on predatory princes and princely peddlers, the state and international labor migration intermediaries in China. Now, Xiang Biao is a public intellectual. You can see that from the number of Chinese students who are here. Transcending Boundaries, Community and Authority in a Globalizing China, a book from 2000, was reprinted as a contemporary classic in 2018. And his work has been translated into Japanese, French, Korean, Spanish, and Italian. Indeed, from the beginning, Xiang has been less concerned with theory as it is understood in the academe, and more with the real world, problem-solving and practical agency, and engaged social sciences, so to speak. In his work on Zhejiang village, for example, he contrasts the pragmatism, the flexibility, and creativity of the migrant workers with the rigidity and lack of imagination of government authorities, and celebrates the victories, however ephemeral, of entrepreneurial agency. In 2020, he publishes Self as Method, which signaled a move away from ethnographic fieldwork and toward a more public-facing posture as a public intellectual. Self as Method is composed of 3 interviews that he gave to Wu Qi, a journalist who works for Datum, a newish publishing house in Beijing, that promises to unite a new generation of authors and readers through text, audio, video, multimedia platforms. Now, the origin of the project, Self as Method, was the observation by one of these Dandu editors that many Chinese, particularly young Chinese, appear not to be very happy as China's century dawns. Massive and rapid changes have radically changed the social worlds and daily lives of 2 or 3 generations of Chinese people since reform and opening. China is much richer now than it once was, but modernity and the market economy have created their own new challenges and stresses, particularly as China's period of rapid growth seems to be coming to an end. As a result, young people often feel lost and confused and don't know what questions to ask or where to look for counsel or wisdom. And this is what Self as Method set out to fulfill. And there, Xiang Biao is opening up an approach which provides a great framework for his subsequent work, as you will also see, I think, in his presentation today. Douban, which is the rough Chinese equivalent of Amazon for books, named Self as Method the most influential book of the year 2020. In 2023, The Economist included Self as Method as one of the 4 basic texts one should read to understand the discipline of anthropology. Clearly, Xiang Biao is not a Chinese scholar writing Chinese books. He is a scholar from China who writes about China from a global perspective. And that's what he will do in a moment. He'll engage in a dialogue with Guido Sprenger, who himself is an anthropologist, who teaches at the Institute of Anthropology here in Heidelberg, and has had, before coming here in 2010, positions at Academia Sinica in Taipei and the University of Münster. He's done research in the uplands of Laos since 2000, is a specialist of the anthropology of Southeast Asia. Cultural identity, kinship, social structures, gender, sexuality all play an important role, mythology and dreaming as well. And he has published on all the important things in life. Money, in 2006, Die Männer, die den Geldbaum fällten, Eros, Erotik und Kultur in Melanesien, eine kritische Analyse, and ecology, plural ecologies in Southeast Asia. And he is interested in questions like how is sociality and cosmology enacted through rituals, how are relationships created and maintained through gift exchange, how do these relationships encompass humans and non-humans, the environment, spirits, animals, and plants, how do boundaries reproduce sociality, while at the same time processing the outside for the inside. Employing anthropological and sociological theory, he attempts to translate local theories and practices into concepts that are able to make a difference for the world and for academia as a whole, and possibly for our societies as well. So essentially, he's really also aiming for that transfer that we've seen so important to Xiang Biao, moving from the academe to life and action. And so I'm looking forward to your conversation, and I now ask you to welcome Xiang Biao and Guido Sprenger warmly.
Wow, thank you very much, Barbara, and thank you for everyone for coming. I mean, this is a very special occasion for me because Heidelberg University, especially for people like me who are very keen to combine social research with the humanities, who are very interested in the question of meaning, who see history and the society and the human existence as a largely question of meaning, and obviously influenced by Max Weber. Heidelberg University has a special place in the world intellectual history. But today, I understand Heidelberg University is not only a place that has a special position in history, it is also a space where we live in, a space where we work, a space where we inhabit, we take action to protect ourselves and to push for certain agendas, also to provide safety and security for research. So you will see why I don't say it lightly, to say today is a special occasion, because this is also an opportunity for me actually to reflect on my own identity, who I am standing here, step in such a space and thinking what we can do to enlarge such a space. So what is freedom? Freedom for me is space. And if the freedom is not practiced, if we don't actively, courageously take action, then this space will shrink, will disappear. And the space of freedom can be kept alive only if you and I and many others work together. So today, the lecture will not be a theoretical academic lecture about what my understanding of freedom as a concept or as a principle is and how to define freedom. But I'm really thinking freedom as action, as space. And by the way, this is again very much influenced by another great German thinker, Hannah Arendt. Right? The freedom is not just internal free will, but freedom, for her, it's very interestingly, she said freedom is a performance. What is freedom? You have to go to the public to take action, to show your view, to perform, to let other people see you, to expose yourself, to face risks and danger. That is freedom. So I was also quite touched just now, half an hour ago. Barbara showed me the exhibition downstairs about freedom of Chinese art. It's all very much about the choreography. So this, I think, touched me because choreography is a performance. It is not some kind of abstract principle. It is a way you express yourself. I think that's a beautiful idea to use choreography to demonstrate how freedom looks like, how freedom feels like. I think that is probably, for me as an anthropologist, this kind of questions probably are more important, or at least equally important, as the theoretical, legal, and administrative definition of what freedom is. So as Barbara mentioned, what really makes me think of the question of freedom is, to be honest, is something I experienced in Germany, which is a shock to me. And the reason that there was a shock is, I'm afraid I will probably present some unpleasant observations, unpleasant for myself. I mean, it certainly is not, it's a partial, is limited to my own experience and observation. It's what I call the kind of reverse cultural shock. Because normally, anthropologists, cultural shock is that you are shocked by how different your home country is from the country that you just arrived. But the reverse, the cultural shock, is a shock by the similarity rather than differences between China and Germany. And it sounds ridiculous. I mean, Germany and China, if you look at the political system, look at the law and the policy, and look at the statistics of how many people are arrested, etc., I mean, there's no comparison between the two. But what really shocked me is that despite all these differences, formal differences, I witness in practice, in reality, how quickly the two societies can be quite similar. Once a certain administrative, political decision was made, the office space becomes very quiet. People start whispering. People start looking around when they start talking. Colleagues start using Gmail, personal emails, and tell me, don't send a message to my office address. I have to use. I mean, this, of course, is common in the US. Probably they do more than much earlier than our German colleagues did. And then also, when people mention certain name or certain event, you can see the pain, nervousness. Oh my God, was it okay I said that? To be honest, I never imagined this could happen. And to be honest, I don't know how to theorize, understand this yet, but I think it's important for me as a new member of German society to report my observation. Despite the formal policies, laws, structures, how vulnerable you and me can be. On one certain political wind change, the chill, you can feel the chill so quickly. So this is something I also want to address today, how to build this resilience from below. So what I call the small common. So that was then one of the similarity between China and Germany about academic debate is the question of relation between freedom and responsibility, or freedom and a common ground. As Barbara mentioned, in China, there's a kind of a saying which is quite recent, appeared about 5 years ago, to say, you guys, academics, you are eating your rice from the rice pot of the government, because the government gives you money. And you are not allowed to crack the pot. Basically to say you should not bite the feed you should not bite the hand who feed you food. So you can easily imagine Putin says that, you can easily imagine Modi in India says that, and you can easily imagine the governor of Florida says that. Or why should we give you public money to support this kind of weird queer studies and etc. And then in recent debate in Germany, I heard this again and again. Isn't it reasonable for the government to expect us as a researcher to pay at least some respect to the public sentiment, public feeling? Shouldn't we be more considerate, more sensitive towards the mainstream views? Isn't it the politician's duty to make sure that the public funding will be used in a way that does not upset public feeling, etc.? I mean, of course, this for us is very easy to argue against, because there's a way for us to contribute to the public right support or public feelings precisely to tell the truth, and etc. But I think that it should be taken seriously because, number one, I'm afraid that is a very common sentiment, and both in China, Germany, and other parts of the world, and we cannot just brush away to say, oh, it's an uneducated view. The public sentiment do deserve our more careful attention. This number one. Number two, I think it does raise a very serious question, which is about the freedom and the responsibility of freedom and the common ground. And I understand that this is probably particularly sensitive in Germany. When I try to understand better about the debate, so I had a very meaningful conversation with a German PhD student and asked her, so why do you think certain critics of Israel will be kind of needed to be censored, will be regarded as something close to anti-Semitism? How do you feel? Did you feel is kind of hurt? Does it make you feel angry? Or because she is also quite emotional when talk about that. And her answer really educated me. She said, no, the biggest feeling when she saw the criticism of Israel actually is a fear. The fear that the German society will be further fragmented. The fear that there will be further polarization or fragmentation of the German society. And she said there's already lots of worry about the instability of the public in German society. Now if you have more this critical voice, touch on sensitive issues, it will lose common ground further. So therefore, it is a real question, should academic freedom or individual freedom be constrained or be regulated in order to protect the common ground? As I mentioned in some essays, this time, during the students' protest to support Palestine and against the Israeli atrocities, and one interesting phenomenon is that what I call the preemptive panic. The students have not started anything yet, but the university started panicking already. And this is, once the students just set up a camp, within an hour, the police may come in, and etc. So it's a very preemptive, anticipatory panic. And the second interesting phenomenon is that this time, the person who are particularly fierce in cracking down freedom of expression and the protest actually are the liberals. The liberals, in Germany, this is very obvious. Why do liberals do that, and why do liberals have to be so anticipatorily panic? My interpretation is that there is a deep fear of losing common ground. So that is a reasonable fear. We have to understand that too. Because in the US, you also have people accuse students in Columbia, students in Los Angeles, as a part of a Trump group. I was surprised, how could you bring the two things together? And then I found out that there is a logic behind that, because they said both of them, the students and the Trump supporters, are undermining Western civilization, are undermining Western democracy. We hear that in German debate too. Either they say, oh, that's probably related to AfD in some way, or AfD or the right wing is utilizing the students' movement because to further fragment the society. So then the question of common ground is very important. So what's the relation between the freedom and the common ground? Should the freedom be constrained in order to protect common ground? And my answer is basically no. The reason is, number one, again, I'm sorry to report an unpleasant observation. My view is that our common ground is already lost. And it's very important to realize that in order to formulate realistic strategy. How we can live in a world that the common ground is moving away under our feet. Not completely lost. So, but then the notion that we can have a universal agreement, have a broad consensus on a global scale about what is right and what is wrong, that is no longer effective guideline for action. And the number then, but I'm still optimistic that a lot of things can be done because there's no big common ground, but this is a time to build small common ground. In order to build a small common ground, I propose two suggestions. Number one is that institutional neutrality. Basically, universities, research institutes should refrain themselves from making political statements, and instead should focus all the energy to protect individual staff, individual faculties to express their views. So basically, public institutions should be no more than an instrument, a neutral instrument, or you can say empty vehicle for individuals to express and to debate. But the institution itself should not take a position. And the number two is that it's a more kind of internal reflection among social scientists, possibly scientists too, is how can we make our research, our thinking, our intellectual labor more relevant to the public. And I think the over-professionalization of academia since the Cold War, the end of Cold War, 1990s, actually is a very important reason for the crisis we're having today. Basically, we don't provide enough thought to hold the common ground together. So the research becomes narrower and narrower and become more and more theoretical, and also many public feel alienated instead of they will absorb nutrition from our thinking to build their common ground. So that's a very brief outline. So quickly I go through the 3 points. Number one, what do I mean by the common ground is already lost? I give you 2 examples to demonstrate why my feeling. So when I have this debate in Berlin with Berlin, Munich, and etc. about why it is important to remain, in institutional neutrality, and why institutions should refrain from political statements, and many senior members cannot understand. For instance, why in February 2022, that kind of declaration to say we support Ukraine, and basically I want to say, it was not very wise for university or for institutes to say, oh, we support Ukraine, to make such a statement. This is how Harvard was put in trouble, because in the February 2022, they flew the Ukraine flag over the Harvard yard. And then in 2023 October, the president decided not to fly the Israeli flag in the yard. So the Congress, the group in here, you double standard. How can you do that? Isn't discriminating Israel? You support Ukraine, but you can't support Israel, etc. So I think neutrality means we should not do that. And then why is that so? One reason is because the reality is common ground is not there for institutions to take a political statement which can win consensus. Quickly, the example I was getting to is that the senior leaders feel very bitter. They said, okay, this is universal. Ukraine was invaded. What's wrong for us to show our solidarity with Ukraine? And Israel was attacked by terrorists on the 7th of October. It was a kind of, the atrocity is shocking, the scale and etc. What's wrong for us to demonstrate our solidarity with Israeli victims? And they think people disagree with that is really betray universalism, and this is problematic. But then we have to understand, when the institutions to make such empathy message, to show sympathy with certain groups, from many other people's point of view, it is not a question of solidarity. It is a question of selectivity. Why do you choose in this moment to express solidarity with this particular group? What about the Sudan? What about Armenia? What about 40 years military oppression and etc. in Gaza and etc. Right? So the world has politics. I mean, this is have something to do with the internationalization because our staff and the members are much more international. They have their own life, memory, understanding of world politics. And also is a part to do with that the whole world politics is becoming fragmented. So therefore, this we think is a universal expression of empathy from many other groups' point of view. It is not. It is an action of a bias. And I must say that I support that view. I support the view that we think no solidarity is truly universal and neutral. And it is always because the world politics is so complex, the history is so complex, any expression itself has to touch on power relations, the selectivity of history itself, and the selectivity of policies, existing policies already. So it's already shaped by that. And then another interesting phenomenon, which also keeps me thinking why, is that the sudden switch between the so-called progressive and the conservative political groups. In the US, it is very clear. A couple of years ago, you may remember, the conservatives were talking about freedom of expression, to say, oh, too much political correctness. I wanted to just say what I want. There is a man is a man, woman is a woman. And why do you have to use this political correctness like police me, right? Language policing and etc. And it is a progressive says, okay, there's no such a thing as a neutral freedom. We have to fight and etc. After 7th October, suddenly it's all changed, and it was a progressive who will support Palestine, and they want to decolonize knowledge and etc. Wanted to use the discourse of freedom to protect their right to express. And it is the conservatives who are kind of more on the Israeli side says, okay, there is no neutral freedom. I mean, right is right. There is a universal human value, etc. We have to protect, etc. So the sudden switch. The sudden switch is very confusing, and you can see why today's debate becomes so fragmented. It has something to do with that. And what do I want to get from this example is that both parties now want to use universal language to justify their position. But this universal language can no longer reflect reality. So when the debate becomes a struggle over certain universal symbols and languages, and the debate can be confusing and counterproductive. And this is another example to say that the actual common ground has lost, and what left is some common universal symbols, and we should not be trapped by these universal symbols, and we have to go deeper to see, to face how people actually feel. Very quick, I mean, but the loss of the common ground is not necessarily a bad thing. Why? Because what is lost, the common ground, is primarily a very specific, historically specific scenario, which is basically after Cold War. Then you have this kind of euphoria, the end of history. Basically say, okay, the Cold War, the liberal democracy, capitalism has won the battle, right? The Berlin Wall has failed. We know the Berlin Wall fell. The people from which side is flooded into the other side. It's very clear. There's no one is moving to the opposite. So it's a very decisive victory for the Western liberal democracy and the market economy and the capitalism. So the world will march together towards this common destiny, and also it will be compelled by technology, by more communication, and so therefore under the notion of globalization. But in this this was a common ground, post-Cold War consensus. It was quite important. I mean, China played a very important role in constructing this common ground and the global consensus. You know, people say, you look at China by joining the global market and did well, etc. But now we know it is no longer the case. You know? So within the West, we have many problems. The liberal democracy, as Barbara mentioned, what will happen tomorrow? And then the role of China, role of Russia. So there's no such a thing as a globalization consensus. And why it is a good thing for that to be, I mean, good thing means, well, we don't need to feel too sorry to lose that common ground, because it is illusionary, because it does hide lots of inequalities, racial inequality, historical baggage, and etc. Actually, this time, why the Gaza question becomes so charged globally? I mean, it's not just because the atrocity was shocking, but because people see, young people see how the world, despite all the UN charters, universal principles, the world simply failed to address the very basic question of justice. So that actually the Gaza situation, the reason it triggered so much protest, so much bitter debates and antagonism is not because of the issue per se, but rather it reflects the losing of common ground. And as I mentioned earlier, the liberal establishment was so worried about this losing common ground, so they react in such a way, so it makes things much more complex. But anyway, so the common ground is lost. What does it mean? It means that if we want to artificially cling to a common ground, by policing people, you should not say that, and will not help. That will be only have more oppression created. And then my second point, institutional neutrality. We can make quite a few arguments. I mean, let me make two arguments. One is theoretical, one is more practical. Theoretical is that why institutions should remain neutral. Institutions are very different from individual person. Institutions are created by the public for very specific purpose. I mean, university is slightly special, like Heidelberg. You have such a rich history. It's a little, I mean, it's almost acquired its own personality. So it's a different, slightly different story. Like my research institute, like Max-Planck Society, it was created for the purpose of advanced science only. And the society regulates research institute or universities according to very specific rules, which is the rule of science. And if we don't do science, do research, and there's no reason for our existence because our creation was for that purpose. So therefore, we make political statement and a position is number one, is a step away from the sole reason, sole ground for our existence. And number two, it could open room for power abuse. Why? Because society, both actually outside of university, as well as our staff, do not know how to judge us, do not know how to hold us accountable if we become politicized. I mean, I'm an anthropologist. For instance, I think it is fully legitimate for me as a director of Anthropology Institute to say, from now on, all our staff's publications must have fish in their title. It's ridiculous, but it's legitimate. Why? Because I'm making a decision about science, and my staff, my colleagues, my peers in other parts of the world and the society in large can immediately know how to handle my ridiculous decision. But if I make a political statement, I mean, normally when we make it is often, sounds right and very abstract. So it's very difficult for others, especially for our staff, the university, for junior staff and the students, to hold us accountable, to hold the institution accountable. this is, but the person is different. Individual, because you and I, as a human being, come into this world not to fulfill any particular function. You and I come as a human being. But we choose to do science only as one specific way to fulfill our human potential. And no one can tell us, since now you choose to be scientist, you should have to give up all other aspects of your humanity. So you should, if you're a scientist, you should not talk about politics. You don't have any religious faith, etc. So that will be wrong, because the nature of an individual human being and the institution is different. And the institution does not have a free will, does not have, in my view, does not have freedom of expression, because freedom of expression only belongs to the entity who has a free will, and only human individuals have free will. This is for more theoretical argument why the institutional neutrality is important. And also practically, the institutional neutrality is important simply to avoid institutions to corner self down in a very difficult situation. We know that science, the most important principle of science is self-correcting, is constantly under review, constantly open and ready to change your mind. But for institution to make a formal political statement, and you are not allowed to constantly self-correcting, because you are supposed to stand firm, you're supposed to be loyal to certain principle, and etc. So that is a contradiction you cannot resolve. And furthermore, when research institutions make a political statement, it damages both academic culture and damage politics. Why? As I said, it's because the academic culture is about constantly reflecting, leave everything open. You raise difficult questions, but no clear answer. That's good, right? Ask a good question, that's about science. But political statement is to say you come with a clear conclusion and not allowed to ask any questions. And that is a political statement. And that will change our way of thinking and the style of conversation in classroom, in office, in cafe immediately. And then it also damages politics itself. Why? Because when research institute, universities make a political statement, they are not making simple political statement. They are making moral statement, because they have to project this political position as a moral position. And then you almost have a quasi-religious air to the politics. By doing so, you also freeze the politics itself. I suppose your favorite chancellor, Andernow, he keeps changing his mind and in parliament debate, and people say, you said something different last week. And he said, how can you accuse me for becoming smarter every day? So the genuine politicians, they do change too. This is the business of being politician, is to say, I'm pragmatic, I have some very basic principles, but I have to act according to the situation of the day. We give leeway to them because this is their job, right? But when we academics make a political statement, we turn such a modern notion of politics, very pragmatic interaction, calculation, responding to reality, into some frozen moral commanding, which is very problematic. So, there's other reasons for me to argue for the institutional neutrality. I want to hear, this is, there definitely will be lots of questions be raised, whether the practical and etc. How should we do that? This we can come back during Q&A as well. I'm not saying science is neutral. I'm not saying institutions can be neutral. No. Here, this is a strategy. It's not a question of definition. Analogy would be between love and household. So science itself is a kind of like love, is a passion, is your curiosity. Of course, you have bias. In social science, we have all political and ideological influence, etc. We have to be open about that. That is like love. But how you can make sure the love will last? From day to day, the love relations will be enjoyable, will nurture you. We have to learn how to run household. You have to keep the balance sheet. clear. You have to make the ends meet, and you have to do laundry, and etc. So institutional neutrality is not to say, oh, institution and science can be neutral. No, cannot. But in order to protect the passion, the genuine love, institutions have to adopt a certain strategy, like running a household, which is neutrality. Yeah. So finally, I mean, the quick point is that, of course, institutional neutrality is the purpose is to create a space for thinking and debating. Freedom, as I said, is a space. If you don't fill the space with actual meaningful action and thinking, and there's no point to have this freedom. And then you go back briefly, I'm running out of time, I just briefly to review about the situation in China. To tell you why I feel that that kind of the small common, that kind of space, that kind of style of thinking, for us, we have to take a responsibility, thinking what kind of work we do, how we spend our time as public funded members. I mean, the question of responsibility is there. I'll just give a quick example to say, actually, this small commons is like a faculty, or a small research group, is a small collective where individuals can exercise direct democracy. A kind of small collective can genuinely represent the collective will of these members. So this is extremely important, actually, to keep freedom alive. Even in a situation there is no formal freedom guaranteed, like in China. I mean, the political situation, the law in China basically remains the same over the last 60 years. At least the last 40 years is the same. But the feeling is very different. The 1980s, 1990s, and today is very different. And the 1980s and 1990s, you do have that kind of notion of small commons. I mean, the reason is complex because of some very senior cadres after Cultural Revolution. They also become quite critical in reflecting politics, etc. And then you have relatively young scholars with educated youth who are sent down to the countryside, who did not have proper education but observed everything, firsthand, and then they return to university. So they create the kind of a small, because I was a part of that, so I know firsthand. So that kind of debate, that kind of a discussion is very lively. And there's no formal freedom. You could not publish anything you want in China. No. But in that discussion, you do feel that you are free. It's like a choreography. You feel you're expressing yourself, you're probing, you are really dialoguing with the world in a very genuine way. And you see all the difficulties, etc. At that moment, including you feel the constraints, but you feel free because your will is there. You see your will is unfolding when you have all the genuine questions around you. And the situation today is so different, of course, mainly because of political change at a high level. But we must recognize, I think the late 1990s, 2000s, professionalization of social science in China played a very important negative role too. So now it's all about the ranking, about the publication, and how you find a little gap in literature, and to say, I can come up with a new term that's more interesting than other authors, and etc. And of course, the tenure system imported from the US and etc. basically turned academics in China into quite a mechanical, I won't say robots, but quite mechanical manual workers. I mean, they're very unhappy, but for young people, what can you do? So the real pressure is there, the life pressure is there. And this over-professionalization on the surface makes the academic output very lively. You count the publication, etc. That's a lot. But then it's really hollow out the life world of academic life. So you go to the corridors, colleagues don't talk to each other. There's no culture of conversation anymore because everyone is so busy to fill up forms to get the publications out. There's no kind of curiosity to say, oh, no, now you have to stop because I have been thinking of this question for the last 3 days. I'm now going to burst. You have to listen to me. I'm telling you this and what do you think and etc. And that is what happened in the 1980s, 1990s. So anyway, so I very much, this is probably a bit of loose, but I, as an anthropologist, I do feel that we have the duty to make our research more organic. More organic meaning the question is coming from life, coming from the world. But of course, this is a very dangerous. This, I think, probably go back to the question of freedom, especially Hannah Arendt's definition of freedom. Freedom implies a danger and a risk. If we do not take certain risk, if we do not face danger, probably we are not exercising our freedom. So this is my final point, and I hope you all join me to take a risk at a certain point. Thank you. Yeah, okay.
Well, thank you very much for this really inspiring and especially in the end very uplifting talk. And we all hate those forms that you're mentioning. Nevertheless, this call for neutrality, of course, has certain limits. And I would like to describe to you a little episode from what happened last summer here. And it's just a small example how different the surroundings, as maybe just in Heidelberg University, maybe you're just a little island of this kind of variety, are from the experiences that you described for your experiences in Germany. And that is during the annual university party, which was celebrated on a lawn in a courtyard. The rector just had finished her opening, her greeting words, and had left the lawn, and then a small group of students came on and shouted something like "Down to Israel, stop the genocide," and they did, and very few people from the audience also joined, and there was a poster showing Israel, a map of Israel in Palestinian colors. And then, after what felt like a minute, the rector walked up to them and said, "We heard your message. You got your message communicated. We heard your message. We would like to continue celebrating." Mm-hmm. And they left. Mm-hmm. And actually, the police was called off actively. Mm-hmm. So at once, one would say, okay, that's an alternative to what you were describing. There was no preemptive panic, and actually, the police didn't arrive, mm-hmm. or just almost in a way that nobody noticed. And the other thing is, of course, this was also an act of civility. And maybe this is another term that we can think about when we think about neutrality, because neutrality is very difficult to achieve. All the institutions are embedded into relationships, and when you follow up on these relationships, you end up with some sort of dependencies where political commitments, like in investments, like in scholarly cooperations, suddenly become a liability. But then, on the other hand, if civility would be another value, another idea, then we have a situation like that one. Another aspect to that, and that's my last point for the moment, would be yes, I thought that this was the right way of doing it, both from the university side and from the student side. Nevertheless, the neutrality and the civility that were demonstrated there were not sometimes understood as neutrality. So handling situations like this led to accusations that the rector was anti-Semitic or was supporting anti-Semitic people because she was actually saying a few words to them, imagine that. And so neutrality also has to be understood as neutrality. And if that doesn't happen, where are you then? So that's my question. No, that's a great question. Number one, about the civility. I think that's very important because
we are losing common ground as a kind of substantive consensus, how the world will move to. And by the way, now there's a huge debate in the economic science about the Nobel Prize this year, and for me, that is a very interesting example to show how the kind of elite try to cling on a common ground that they already lost. So that's the nation, why nation fails, and etc. The narrative is, in my view, is quite very. It presented itself as universal truth, but it's a very Eurocentric point of view. But now, so that's being debated. But anyway, so that is kind of the common ground is lost. So therefore, the manner, style, and the procedure probably become more important. And for me, that is a kind of, if you think of neutrality, what really make up the neutrality in concrete way, what is this kind of the cells and the bones of neutrality, is this kind of the style, manner, procedure, including the civility. So I think from your story, I think that was a case of neutrality, right? To say that it's not say we agree or disagree with your message, but just to state the fact that we heard your message and now the business is the summer party to carry on. And then about, thank you. Then about the question of whether or not neutrality will be misunderstood. That is really important, and I think this is why we have a job to do, social scientists, because we have to articulate. We cannot simply declare, oh, we are neutral. We have to explain why that is a neutral, and then the fact people say, oh, you are tolerating a certain stance by not cracking down and so that is a theoretical question to debate, because the university has no right and no obligation, as far as I understand, to crack down anything you agree or disagree, right? So that needed to be articulated. And then you also to related to that, what is a neutrality? For example, like this case, if someone accuses the rector being tolerating problematic statement, my response would be, number one, it is neutral because we are not endorsing or against, number one. Number two is that at that moment, the most important thing is to keep this order. To keep this order. It would be silly to engage in direct debate with the students. You agree or disagree, or you disagree with a particular specific message or method. The most important thing is to lift ourselves up a higher level to say, yes, your message is heard. This is my business as a rector, as a professor, to hear your message, right? So we'll process it, but then also my job now is to keep this event in a good order. So that will be always the focus is to say, I need to keep it in good order, keep the space open. Yeah. So no, definitely, I mean, the accusation was inevitable. So therefore, keep being neutrality is not easy. So you have to engage lots of debates, and we need to have a good argument for that. Yeah.
So if I understand you correctly, then neutrality would be just would not be just passive refraining from certain actions, but would be a performance, just like Hannah Arendt's definition.
Absolutely. I'll give you another example. For example, one good counter-argument about neutrality is that people say, we are anthropologists, in Florida, critical racial studies and gender studies are being shut down. Now, so entire discipline of sociology, the biggest social science discipline in the US, is in danger. So people say, how can you afford to be neutral? Because now you are under existential threat. Mm-hmm. So my response is that, okay, you have two ways to react. Number one is you say, okay, your gender politics is wrong, you don't understand, and etc. And the number two is that you push back to say, so university is neutral, and the professor have the right to decide what they teach. So therefore, the Florida governor's mistake was not he misunderstood the gender politics. He is fully entitled to have his own gender politics. His mistake, his wrongdoing was intervene the neutrality of a university. So in order to do that, it's quite active. You have to mobilize lots of legal, philosophical, ethical argument to say why the neutrality is the basis of our existence. You, as a governor, you can comment on the gender politics. You're welcome, come to our seminar, etc. But you cannot take action to intervene our neutrality. Yeah.
But that sounds to me that you are stressing, as it were, the operational closure of science and also the institution of a university. So it operates by its own terms and therefore provides a certain independence. So it can take up things from the outside, like government politics, but it has to process it into its own meanings. But what I would take issue at would be your formulation that the university should show a higher level.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if that is possible, if social relations are not much flatter in a way. Mm-hmm. And for instance, maybe the university should rather try to facilitate the emergence of positions that are not exhausted by the positions that are created by the conflict, where you have to decide you're either for something or against something. If the university, what would you think? I mean, is there a possibility of positions that are not exhausted by the conflict lines?
Yeah. So definitely yes, and I go back to earlier point. It sounded like you use a very interesting term, operational closure, right? So because there's always a danger because we want to emphasize autonomy and independence. People, they're now outsiders also think, oh, you are ivory tower or you're irrelevant. So we think, oh, autonomy is important, but has a danger of closing up. So my point here is that the institutional neutrality is a tool, an instrument, and a condition for each and every student and the faculty members to become more engaged with outside the world and take different positions. So therefore, so university has this is probably we'll discuss tomorrow from the Dumont's ethnographic study. What do we mean by high? High is, we think, I mean, Dumont has an interesting point. They say, the caste system. The high is not necessarily to say one caste is higher, one individual is higher than other person. Because in this Hindu cosmology, I mean, this is problematic, but I found it interesting, the idea interesting. Being high simply means your coverage is wider. For example, today, the rector, of course, respect her. She take office, we think in hierarchy is higher. But now in the modern democracy, nobody think, okay, the rector as a person somehow is superior to any other faculty members or even student. Then how do we understand her position being higher? Her position is higher is not she has more virtue or has more ability than me, but because the office, her scope of responsibility is wider than mine, right? So therefore, the high is come from the wise. So now go back to the question of this is a neutrality to say, okay, I'm a rector here. Actually, in terms of this political, ethical, philosophical question, my judgment is no any superior than you. Probably if you are philosophers, probably you do much better than me. But my business is to code this position, have a broad scope of balancing things. So for that, I have to take the neutral position. But at the same time, I do that in order to encourage you, anthropologists, philosophers, to go out, to be as loud as you can, of course, I mean, based on good argument and etc., to be as organic as we can, as I mentioned. Yeah.